Hey, podcast friends. This is Dr. Steve Hewlett with the podcast Simple Healthy Choices for Weight Loss, where every week we help people who have realized that as their health has been declining over the years, the number of medications that are being prescribed is increasing. We want to help you reverse this health path so you can live the vibrant, pain-free, and hopefully medication-free life you deserve to live. And as a special bonus, due to the fact that sugar addiction is affecting more and more people every year and is directly causing devastatingly poor health consequences, I am one of over 40 specialists being interviewed on the free online Quit Sugar Summit this year. If any of you feel you are suffering from the very real and growing issue of sugar addiction, you can go to our website, drstevehewlett.com, and click on the Sugar Summit link at the top of the page to enroll in this free online Quit Sugar Summit that will be aired on January 6th to January 12th. Hey, welcome back again, podcast friends. And today, this is going to be the fourth podcast of this four-part series. And if you missed it if you look back at episode 107, I talked all about your cholesterol, your HDL cholesterols, your HDL cholesterol, or your HDLs, VLDLs, IDLs, LDLs, and even your chylomicrons. So that's all talking about how we transport fat and cholesterol all around the body, because both of those are extremely vital to our health. And so then in episode 108, we actually just talked about cholesterol because we've been lied to so long about cholesterol that everybody believes it's true. And actually 109, I talked about fat for the exact same reason. Cholesterol and fat have gotten very bad reputations for no reason whatsoever, except for making lots and lots of money for the food companies and drug companies. So that's why. So I want to make sure you realize fat and cholesterol are not only nice to have, they are vital to our importance. So now that leads us to this episode we're in right now. And this episode, we're going to talk about what actually does cause heart attacks, what actually does cause atherosclerosis, because it is not high LDL cholesterol. And remember, as we go through this, and we've talked about this in all three of the past podcasts, when you talk about cholesterol, cholesterol is a molecule. When you talk about fatty acids, that is a molecule, okay? A bunch of carbons and hydrogens. When you talk about LDLs or VLDLs, these are particles. It's a protein shell, like a little submarine, and inside there's cholesterol and there's triglycerides. So when they say that high LDLs is what's causing cardiovascular disease, that makes no sense whatsoever. And I've explained that in the past. So let's get into what actually does. If you remember from back in episode 107, called The Fats on the Move, the Science of Lipid Transport. If you haven't seen that, you might want to go back and listen to that first, because this will kind of make a little bit more sense. But basically what happens is your VLDLs, these are your very large lipoproteins, okay? I mean, very low density lipoproteins. Okay, and the reason they're low density, these are the ones that are made in the liver. And again, remember, this is a particle. So there's a protein shell, and then there's cholesterol and triglycerides. What happens, and this is when disease happens, when you eat carbohydrates, and you eat carbohydrates all the time, like we do, like we're being told to do by our food pyramid, by the drug companies and food companies who are making money off of all this stuff. When you're told to eat most of your calories from seeds, grains, flours, pastas, rice, which is the worst thing you could possibly do, but they still promote this. They still promote this ludicrous food pyramid. It's crazy. And now they call it the food plate. Same thing. They're still lying to everybody. When you eat all those carbohydrates, the basic building block of all carbohydrates is glucose. So all these carbohydrates that you're eating all the time, every 3 to 4 hours, and I've talked about that in past podcasts too, you're eating every 3 to 4 hours because you're not giving your body any nutrients that it needs. Your body does not need any glucose that you need to eat. All the glucose that it needs, it can make out of fat and it can make out of protein. So you do not have to eat carbohydrates at all. Okay. You can, as long as you keep it low. And that's what we're going to talk about. Because the more carbohydrates you eat, the more glucose, because that's the basic building blocks of carbohydrates, which is anything plant-based, anything doesn't come from an animal. Its basic building block is glucose. So all these carbohydrates, all these plant-based, non-animal foods that you eat, you're putting more and more glucose into the bloodstream. Your body, your whole bloodstream, if you take all the glucose in your bloodstream, okay, it comes to about 1 to 2 teaspoons of sugar. That's all. That's all the glucose we have in our entire bloodstream is 1 to 2 teaspoons. So when you look at how much sugar we eat, one can of soda pop, 12-ounce can of soda pop has around 10 teaspoons of sugar in it. Then you add that to all the ultra processed food and everything else. They put sugar in everything because they know you're addicted. They spent billions of dollars to get you addicted. And now they've got you addicted. So you're constantly eating all this flour and sugar all the time. It all gets turned into glucose. Now you have all this glucose in your blood. Remember, you only need 2 teaspoons, period. So all this extra glucose that your body cannot use, it assumes that you know what you're doing by what you're putting in your mouth. So it thinks that it's supposed to take all this glucose and turn that into energy. So the way it does it, it takes all this glucose in the liver and it turns it into triglycerides. Okay, remember a triglyceride is this is the mobile form. This is the way your body moves triglycerides around or fat around your body. And it's also how it stores fat. It stores it and mobilizes it in the form of triglycerides. A triglyceride is like a big capital E. It's got the vertical backbone, a picture capital E. So you have a glycerol backbone, and then the 3 horizontal parts are fatty acids. And that's what your body does. Your liver's turning all these glucose molecules that it can't use for energy because you're not burning up anywhere near the energy that you're eating. So it turns all these into fatty acids in the liver. Then the liver combines that to glycerol to make these triglycerides. Then what it needs to do is it takes these triglycerides from the liver that's made from all this excess carbohydrates. This is not the fat that you eat. That goes through a different process through the chylomicrons. And again, I talked about that in episode 107. So these triglycerides are what your liver's making from all the glucose that you're eating, which means all the carbohydrates you're eating. So you're making massive amounts of triglycerides. What the body normally does is it takes the cholesterol and triglycerides, puts this protein around it, this protein submarine, and that's called the VLDL, a very low density lipoprotein, because it has a protein and it has the cholesterol and lipid fat as in the shell of it or down in the hull of it. Now, when you eat excess carbohydrates, which means you're eating excess glucose, which means your body's trying to figure out what to do with it. So it turns all this excess glucose into triglycerides. So now what happens is inside your liver is trying to do what to do. So now it's making these same normal VLDL particles that it always has, but now it's got a lot more triglycerides that you have to put in it. So you have very little amount of cholesterol and a lot of triglycerides versus what you normally have. Because you normally have from a VLDL, it usually comes out and you have somewhere around twice as much triglycerides as you do cholesterol. But now when you're eating this, you have a lot of triglycerides, 3 to 4 times as much as cholesterol. The reason that is because you're eating so much glucose that you're making so many triglycerides. Your body's trying to get that out of the liver and mobilize that around to the fat cells so you can store all this extra fat that you're producing from all these carbohydrates you're eating. And that's why people get more and more obese. So now you have all these triglycerides and this cholesterol and this VLDL, and it's traveling around your bloodstream and it's dropping off all this triglycerides. And again, I talked about all this in episode 107. The difference is normally as it drops off these triglycerides, it goes from a VLDL, from a very low density lipoprotein down to an IDL, which is an intermediate density lipoprotein because it's lost some of its triglycerides. Then it goes down to a small as it gets rid of more triglycerides, it goes down to an LDL, a low density lipoprotein. That's the normal way. But since we had way more triglycerides in the hull than we did cholesterol, as we drop off all those triglycerides going into all the fat cells, the ship, this submarine actually shrinks down even smaller than a normal LDL. So a normal LDL, it's called a large buoyant LDL. Normally what happens is that once it gets down to a large buoyant LDL, because it's dropped off some of its triglycerides, that goes back to the liver and starts getting more cholesterol and more triglycerides and turns back into a VLDL before it's released again. However, when you have these LDLs, when you had so many triglycerides because of the massive amount of carbohydrates that you eat, which means the massive amount of glucose you're eating, now as these go down the LDLs, it's given all this triglycerides. And since you had more triglycerides and less cholesterol, as the triglycerides leave this ship, this LDL becomes very, very small. It's called a small, dense LDL. And this is what causes all the problem. It's these small, dense LDLs made because of eating so much glucose, getting turned into so many triglycerides. Your body's trying to get rid of it. And so it makes these small, malfunctioned LDLs. And now there's a lot more that goes to it, but that's why it gets small. It's not the fact that it's small. It's not the size of it that really makes the big difference. It's the fact that when it is small like that, usually the LDL will go back and it'll dock up on the liver. Remember we talked about the E protein? It'll dock on the liver, go back in the liver, and it become a VLDL again. But now since you have these small, dense LDLs, because of having too many triglycerides in there in the first place, these do not dock to that E protein as well. They don't dock. So where a normal LDL, it usually takes about 12 hours to go from a VLDL down to an LDL. And then once it's an LDL, it stays in the system for about 2 days. But with these small, dense LDLs that don't fit in that dock very well, since they don't get taken up, they stay in the bloodstream longer. And as they stay in the bloodstream longer, like instead of staying for 2 days, like a normal large buoyant LDL, it stays more like 4 days. So it's in the system twice as long. So when you add this, when you have these small, dense LDLs, and then you add to that all the other things that go along with eating all these carbohydrates, which means having very high insulin levels. And if you do this for very long, for like 10, 20, 30 years, like people do, you end up with insulin resistance. And high insulin levels, along with these small, dense LDLs, cause even more damage. And we'll talk about that. But besides this, you also have the increased glucose because now you have insulin resistance. So you have more glucose floating around in your blood. And that's why you get the high A1Cs. You've got a lot of glucose because your insulin doesn't work anymore. The reason your insulin doesn't work anymore is because you kept your insulin levels so high for so long, your body's become resistant. So now these small, dense LDLs that have get damaged, they stay in they don't dock to the liver very well. They stay out in the bloodstream for twice as long as normal. Now you have this high glucose. So this high glucose, because of high insulin levels, this high glucose, it attaches to the small, dense LDLs. And that's called glycation. Anytime glucose attaches to a protein, that's called glycation. Okay. And that is not good. You don't want glucose attached to all your proteins. And this is what A1C is for those of you who are diabetics or pre-diabetic. When you go to get your A1C tested, that's where glucose attaches to the protein in red blood cells. And once it attaches, it doesn't come off. So the more glucose that attaches to the protein in red blood cells, the higher your A1C is. Okay. And this is called glycation. And again, glycation is not good for your arterial walls, and it's not good for the proteins in these LDLs, these small, dense LDLs. Now, on top of all this, there's also inflammation, because when you eat this type of food, and I've talked about this in the past, one, all this ultra-processed, man-made food in the box, bottle, bag, and can that's loaded with vegetable and seed oils, loaded with sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and loaded with chemicals, okay, these seed oils. All these seed oils and all the fructose that's in the sugar and high fructose corn syrup, these are extremely inflammatory to your body. It causes inflammation in your body. This inflammation also damages these small, dense LDLs. So now you have a particle that's damaged inside your arterial walls, okay, along the lumen of your arterial walls. there's another little lining. It's like a velvet lining on the inside of your arteries called the glycocalyx. And the glycocalyx, what that does, again, it's like little velvet lining. And this is what helps determine what gets into the arterial wall and what stays in the lumen of the artery, okay, the middle of the artery. It has been shown that when you eat carbohydrate, a high carbohydrate meal, you actually damage this glycocalyx. And this velvet lining shrinks, it shrivels up to practically nothing. And so it can't protect the arterial walls anymore. And this usually lasts for about 6 hours after a high carbohydrate meal. However, remember, if you eat carbohydrates, okay, and that's your main meal, like they're trying to tell you to do, you do not stay full for very long. So people who tend to eat carbohydrates as their main meal, they tend to eat about every 3 to 4 hours. So as you're damaging this glycocalyx, okay, normally it would repair it, it kind of come back after 6 hours, but now people go and they eat more carbohydrates, so it damages it even more. Okay, so now you have a damaged glycocalyx. Okay, you have a small, dense LDL that's damaged. One, it's small. And again, the size doesn't really matter because like a normal LDL is around 24 to 25 nanometers. A small dense LDL is around 20 to 21. So yes, it is smaller, but it's not the size so much that matters except for it's dysfunctional. So it doesn't dock to the receptor on the liver as well. And it gets oxidized a lot easier. It gets inflamed and the glycocalyx is disrupted. So now these small dense LDLs actually attach to the arterial wall and they go inside the arterial wall. And this is where all the damage really occurs. So now you have these small dense LDLs inside the arterial wall. Now your body knows that these are not supposed to be there. So what they do through the natural process of trying to take care of itself, it sends out your white blood cells, these macrophages, and these are what's supposed to go, and it's part of the inflammatory process where it takes care of all the debris and all the chemicals and all the stuff that's in our body that should not be there. So our body produces white blood cells, which are macrophages, to go and start taking care, start disintegrating these small, dense LDLs. And just like they do with bacteria and viruses, when a white blood cell engulfs a bacteria, it releases enzymes called lysozymes, and it goes in and it starts just like acid. It just eats up the bacteria and eats up these viruses. Well, it's doing the same thing when you have these small, dense LDLs. They know that those aren't supposed to be in the arterial wall. So it sends macrophages to start eating them and releasing these enzymes, okay, these lysozymes. As it releases these enzymes to get rid of these small, dense particles that are inside, and remember, it's the particle. This isn't cholesterol. This isn't cholesterol causing any of this. It's the small, dense LDL particle that is causing all this damage. And it's small, dense because of all the carbohydrates that you eat that get turned into triglycerides. Okay. So yes, I keep going over the same thing because I really want you to understand this. It is not cholesterol that causes cardiovascular disease or atherosclerosis. So let's get back. So now inside the arterial wall, you have these small, dense LDLs that have been damaged by oxidation because of all the inflammation. They've also been damaged. Oh, there's also, when you use glucose, and I've alluded to this earlier, when you use glucose for your energy source, one of the byproducts is called reactive oxygen species, okay, ROSs. And these are charged oxygen molecules. These are called free radicals. And these also cause damage in your body. The more free radicals you have, the more damage this causes to your blood vessels and to the particles inside your blood vessels. And so when you do this, when you have all these ROSs, the reactive oxygen species, that's why they tell you to take antioxidants, because they're saying, go ahead and eat carbohydrates. You're going to make these free radicals, which you shouldn't. But instead of telling you not to eat carbohydrates, they just tell you to take antioxidants to take care of it. And that doesn't work because you produce way more free radicals with your nutrition than what antioxidants are going to take care of. So you have small dense LDLs in the lumen. They've been damaged by these free radicals while they were floating around the bloodstream. They've been glycated by glucose. It's damaged the arterial wall. So now these small dense LDLs, they stay out in the system for a lot longer because they don't dock into the liver anymore. So now they're inside the artery, the arterial wall. your macrophages come and start eating them. As it releases all these enzymes, it starts making what's called a foam cell. Kind of picture it like a garden hose, and you have the water going through the lumen of the garden hose. But think of the wall of the garden hose itself. As these little small dense particles get embedded into the lumen, or I mean into the wall of this garden hose, now you have these macrophages coming down, releasing their enzymes. It's caused this foam. These cells, they start swelling up like foam cells. And as it does, picture a bunch of air going into the wall of a garden hose. It starts pushing out into the lumen. So as all these foam cells are being formed inside the arterial wall, it jetties out into the lumen. And so what that does, it slows the heart rate down or slows the blood flow down. And just like when you're floating, if you ever go floating in a river and you're floating down and you see this little rock jettying out in the middle of the river, what you'll notice is the water, as it goes past, it kind of swirls on the far side of this rock where all that water is going through, and it causes it to be stagnant. That stagnancy is exactly what happens with the bloodstream also. This blood can swirl and get stagnant, and as it does, it can throw blood clots. So you have decreased blood flow going through these foam cell invaded walls of the arteries. So that gets narrow. So you have decreased blood flow and you have stagnant, so you can increase blood clots. If this is happening up in the heart, which is a very common place for it to happen, this can decrease blood flow to the heart, causing cardiovascular disease, causing heart attacks. Okay. So it's these foam cells from these small dense LDLs that are jetting out. It is not from plaque, from cholesterol floating around in your blood. That is a lie that's been told over and over and over again. So what is plaque? When you damage your blood vessels, okay, how do you damage your blood vessels? You damage them, one, by getting atherosclerosis, because when you do this, when you have all these foam cells in there, these arteries become very stiff, okay? When they become stiff, they don't dilate anymore. Like every time your heart pumps, your blood vessels should dilate. But if you have hardening of the arteries caused by these small dense LDLs that are embedded in the lumen because of all the sugar and the inflammation and everything else that's going on that we've just talked about, when you have that, what this does is it causes damage, causes little tears in the arterial wall. So your body tries to fix these tears that are happening in the arterial wall. Well, all your cells, remember, every single cell in your membrane or in your body has the membrane that's made out of fat and made out of cholesterol. So when you damage these cells in the arterial wall, you get fat and cholesterol. However, because that's what those damaged cells are made out of. However, you're also trying to produce more cells to actually fix this. So your body sends more LDLs, more cholesterol out there so it can take and remember, LDL is a particle. It has cholesterol and triglycerides in it. So as this protein submarine is carrying this cholesterol into the fat cell to where this damage is, it's trying to heal those cells. So, and I've said this in the past, that's why when your body is trying to heal those cells, that torn up arterial wall from these small dense LDLs, you're going to see an increase in your LDL, your good large buoyant LDL particles. You're going to see an increase in those because it's trying to patch this area. So blaming cholesterol, LDL particles on this, saying that that's what's in plaque, is like, and I've said this earlier, it's like blaming every time you see a car wreck, there's always an ambulance there. So that's like saying, oh, every time there's a car wreck, there's an ambulance there. So ambulances must be causing the car wrecks. That makes no sense whatsoever. But that's exactly what they're saying, because we damage our blood vessels, our arterial walls, because of all the glucose that we're eating, because of all the carbohydrates we eat, and the man-made food with all its toxins. You damage the blood vessels, and the body is trying to send repair. It's trying to send the ambulance. It's trying to send these LDLs there so it can help repair this damage. That's why you see LDLs. But the LDLs are not what's causing cardiovascular damage. And it is never, ever, ever, no studies, no proper studies have ever shown that high LDL particles cause cardiovascular disease or cause atherosclerosis. Okay. Hasn't been shown. So what is plaque? Plaque is where your body's trying to heal it. So inside these plaque, you're going to have both cholesterol and fatty acids for two reasons. One, because the cells are being damaged, so it releases these because every cell is made up of these. And then also you're taking cholesterol and fatty acids there to help repair and rejuvenate new cells. So plaque has cholesterol, fatty acids, also has cellular waste products because, again, you're causing damage. So all the waste products that are inside those cells, those are released also. So that's in the plaque. And then you're going to have calcium and fibrin. And fibrin is what helps with fibrin clots, like a scab. That's how you make, basically, you're making a little scab on the inside of the blood vessel. But this is all normal. This happens all the time. It's just that when you have all these small dense LDLs, when you eat carbohydrates all the time, you're damaging your blood vessels constantly. So you're always damaging blood vessels. You're always activating all these LDLs. You're always activating your macrophages, your white blood cells, to help take care of this. And that's why you have plaque on the arteries. It's not from the plaque breaking off that causes cardiovascular disease. It's from the foam cells causing decrease in the lumen of blood vessels, which decreases blood flow plus clot formation, like we said, like the rock jettying out in the river. And again, I really want you to, I hope you understand everything that I just said, because it's so important. Now, a big thing is, how do you know from your blood test, from your cholesterol test, your lipid profile that you get from the doctor, how do you know if you have small dense LDLs, the bad ones, or large buoyant LDLs, the good ones? Because when you go to the doctor, all they do is they test your LDL level. Okay. The way you know is you have to take a ratio. If you look at your total triglyceride level and divide that by your HDL level, okay, you want that number to be less than 2. And really, you'd like to have it closer to 1 or less if you could, but you definitely want it less than 2. So that's your triglycerides divided by your HDLs. So as your HDL number goes up, that makes that ratio go down. And if you listen to the podcast where I talked about in podcast 108, talking about cholesterol, you know that when you have decreased fat intake, you have decreased HDLs, which is your good cholesterol. So when you don't eat fat and cholesterol, you have decreased HDLs. You're eating all these carbohydrates. Carbohydrates get turned into triglycerides. So if you have high triglyceride levels on your blood work from the doctor, on your lipid panel, that comes from carbohydrates. You have to stop eating all your carbohydrates because that's what produces these triglycerides. Okay. So that's why if you're eating all these carbohydrates and you're not eating fat, your HDLs go down, your triglycerides go up. So when you do this ratio of triglycerides divided by your HDLs, that's going to be very, very high. And that means you've got a lot of these small, dense LDLs, and you are on your way to having basically, you're on your way to having organ damage to almost every single organ in your body. And that's why we're seeing all the things that we're doing. So what you want to do is decrease the triglycerides and increase the HDLs. So you decrease the triglycerides by not eating these carbohydrates, and especially not man-made carbohydrates. And you do it by eating fat, because fat's going to increase your HDLs, and that's going to lower that percentage. Okay. So triglycerides divided by your HDLs, you want that less than 2 and preferably closer to 1. The other thing you can look at is your total cholesterol divided by your HDLs again. Okay. Now, if you look at your total cholesterol divided by your HDLs, you want that number less than 5. Okay. And you really like to have it less than 3.5. But again, if your total cholesterol divided by your HDLs is greater than 5, or your triglycerides divided by your HDLs is greater than 2, that is telling you that you have much more of these small, dense, damaged particles that are causing blood vessel damage, and which is called cardiovascular damage. That's where atherosclerosis comes from, and that's where heart attacks come from. So again, that's kind of it in a nutshell. So I hope you understand what atherosclerosis is and what it is not. And remember, so why do they tell you that it's high cholesterol that causes cardiovascular disease? The reason why they tell you this and they stick to this is because, one, you get fatty acids from fat and you get cholesterol. Okay. You get both of these from animal meat. They do not put these in man-made products because they putrefy. They can't stay on the shelf for very long. They can't be shipped for long distances. So that's why they don't put that in the man-made food. So that's why the people who make the man-made food are telling you that that's bad. You need to eat their carbohydrates that their food's made out of. That's why it's money. The whole thing's money. And I've done podcasts in the past. They know what they're doing. They've got you addicted to carbohydrates. They've got you addicted to sugar because they want to make money. They are a business. That's fine. That's fine. They can do that all they want. But we do not have to eat their product. We do not have to give our money to them when we know that they're killing us. And nobody's saying anything about it because now it goes to the drug companies. Because as these food companies start killing us by giving us all these carbohydrates that turn into all this glucose that causes all this damage that we just talked about, when that happens, all of a sudden now we're sick. And so now we go to the drug companies and now they've got medication they can give us also. So now they're all making money off of us being sick. That's why I say they are making a killing off us. And it's actually because they're killing us. And you've got to be aware of this so you can quit eating those products. And remember, just to make a point, is just in 2011, the drug companies made $956 billion just off statins, trying to tell people that cholesterol is what causes cardiovascular disease and you need to take these statins, get rid of it. That is a lie. It has nothing to do with it. And when you take these statins, they're killing every cell in your body. And I talked about that also in a past podcast as well. But when you take these statins, you're actually killing the cells in your body. And when you lower your blood cholesterol, that is your cells that's your cells trying to survive. They're trying to get as much cholesterol into them as possible because it needs the cholesterol. Your cells need cholesterol. So that's why your cholesterol levels go down. It's because you're poisoning your cells, which means you're killing your organs. So that's why you're being told the lies. That's why they're still trying to tell everybody this, because they make way too much money. They will never tell you the truth until we all start noticing for ourselves that when you quit eating all these carbohydrates and you eat mainly animal meat with animal protein, you're going to find that your weight will dissolve. You will not be hungry. You're going to have more energy. You're going to feel great. And that's what I want for you. So the way I try to explain this to you is this scientifically. I want you to understand how the body works. And whenever you're looking at any diets or anything, when you listen to these commercials, remember your body causes you to be hungry to eat because it needs nutrients. When it needs nutrients, it means that you need omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Those are essential fatty acids. You only get those from fat. So you have to eat your fat in order to get it. And then there's 9 essential amino acids, which is the basic building blocks of protein. So out of the total of 20 amino acids that make up all the proteins of all the animals and plants, 9 of those are essential, means you have to eat those. Our body needs those, okay? So when all you eat is plants, or when all you eat is man-made food, you're not getting the fat. You're not getting the fat you need. You're not getting the cholesterol you need. And you're also not getting the amino acids that you need. You also aren't getting very many of the vitamins and minerals that you need also. Even if you eat real God-made fruit and God-made vegetables, you're going to have to eat a ton in order to get the vitamins and minerals you get, to where if you just have a nutrient-dense meat like steak, you're going to get all the vitamins and minerals that you need also. So anyway, I'm rambling. That was just a recap of kind of all the podcasts I tend to do. So just remember, if you really want to be healthy, decrease or eliminate the carbohydrates, stick to mainly animal meat, animal fat, give your body the nutrients it needs, and that goes along with water. And that is what causes atherosclerosis. That's what causes cardiovascular disease. It is not cholesterol. It's these small, dense LDLs. So that's all I've got for today. I hope I didn't confuse things, but I really, really wanted you to understand. And that's all I've got for today. As always, thank you so much for joining me. Have a fantastic week. And as always, make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button below and be sure to tell someone else who may want to change their health path as well. And remember, if any of you feel you are suffering from the very real and growing issue of sugar addiction, You can go to our website, drstevehewlett.com, and click on the Sugar Summit link at the top of the page to enroll in the free online Quit Sugar Summit that will be aired on January 6th through January 12th.